Hello, welcome to Talk Thursday. Today is Women's Day, and with us are three passionate women who have made the environment and climate change a part of their lives. They have very strong opinions, very strong passions, and they will tell us about it. So let me start first. Let me introduce you to Senator Loren Legarda.
Hi Maria, and I'm glad to be here in Rappler. This is pioneering, and we're on prime time in Rappler past 4 p.m.
Prime time wherever.
wherever you are. And happy to be with two stalwarts and eco warriors, Cora and Tony. I'm preempting you. Remember, I'm an anchor.
Cora Claudio, who is...
Hi, good afternoon and happy Women's Day, right? To everyone, man or woman, in planet Earth. I congratulate you. And beyond. Yes, there's much beyond that we have not even discovered. Maria, congratulations for this initiative that will help us really reach not only Filipinos here, but everyone else on planet Earth.
And joining us from Vancouver is Antonia Loizaga, who is, it's past midnight her time. Thank you so much for joining us, Tony.
Yes, hi Maria, hello Cora and Lauren. Thank you very much for asking me to come on in this past night, so I hope I'll be making some sense in terms of the topic today.
Well, since it is so late there, can we start with you, Tony? Can you tell us, what are you doing in Vancouver, first of all?
Thanks, Maria. I'm actually here for a 3-day conference. The Manila Observatory and Ateneo de Manila University were given a grant to do a coastal amenities and climate change project. And essentially, we're looking at megacities at risk to the impacts of climate change. Senator Loren was very kind enough to join us at the launch the other day with the Canadian ambassador and Father Jet Millian, our university president.
Can you tell us, why is this? Why have you focused on this issue?
Metro Manila and other coastal megacities are actually really in the spotlight as far as climate change impacts and what we call exposure and vulnerability aspects of disasters. We look at concentration of resources, both economic, financial, as well as human, and we look at the density of peoples in coastal megacities. And Metro Manila is not alone. Certainly, we're looking at Bangkok, we're looking at Lagos as well, Ho Chi Minh. But as far as cities go in the developing world, we are being given a very close look at because precisely of this over-concentration of resources as well as vulnerable people. And this is one of the advocacies, well, certainly one of the areas of research of the Manila Observatory, disaster risk and climate change adaptation.
Well, for those of you joining us on social media, please join the conversation. You can tweet your questions to any of these three women, to Lauren, to Cora, or to Tony, who's in Canada. Or you can use the hashtag #TalkThursday. Lauren, you've been talking about climate change for a very long time.
Even when no one wanted to listen then.
So tell me why and what's changed. Has anything changed?
Maria, first of all, it is every which way you look at it, a woman's issue. So it is so relevant that we have it today on International Women's Day on March 8th. Second, it's a survival issue. It is so unjust that we Filipinos bear the brunt of disasters. We are one of the 10 most vulnerable nations in the world when we are less than 1% emitter in terms of carbon dioxide, which pollutes the global scenario.
Yeah.
While the US and China combined pollute the world more than 40%, the Philippines is less than 1%. And so insofar as mitigation or reducing our carbon emissions, we must engage in that, but perhaps what we must prioritize is adapting to the vulnerabilities. So climate change adaptation is so important. So when people ask, why is it your priority? Why is Cora into it? Why is Tony studying at MO? Why is Senator Legarda chairman of climate change? Why is there such a committee at all? In fact, they said before we created the committee, it was through a resolution in 2007 on my second term as senator when I said there must be a committee on climate change. I said, oh, that's covered by environment. It is a cross-cutting issue that affects our food that we eat, the water that we drink, our food on the table, and our very life. It is a matter of survival and the greatest humanitarian challenge of all times. So there is no reason why there should be any doubt that any person, private or government, young or old, must not be involved here. It affects us in more ways than one. Sendong happened, Ondoy and Pepeng happened, Pedring and Kiel happened, Typhoon Frank happened. We were not prepared. And so the loss of lives, the loss to agricultural produce, the loss of livelihood, the billions of pesos, and how many percent of GDP is lost because of extreme weather events, because of changes in climate, and because we were never prepared.
So preparing, Cora, you've spent a lot of time talking about it.
I always say that this is one issue, the most important issue that we face in our life now, can wipe us out from planet Earth, no? From the world map. Do you have the map that I gave you?
Yes.
We have those, the IDRC map that shows how vulnerable all our regions are. They're all red.
Yes.
No? And then there is
red
this map,
meaning that the water...
We are very vulnerable. And then we have this map, I don't know if you can show it, that was produced by our oceanographer, tongue sister, Laura David, that shows the different grades of vulnerability of different areas. We should always remember, as Senator Letty Shahani always reminds us, that we are an archipelago. No? We are bounded by two big seas, and we're like floating in this sea of water. So a small degree in rise of temperature of this water can really affect us disastrously.
Tony, what are the most vulnerable areas? I mean, when you say a small degree, Cora, right? The coastal areas, what are the most vulnerable areas for the Philippines?
Is that, sorry, did you ask, that's that for me?
Yes, please, for you, Tony.
Maria?
Yes.
Yes. Well, we're looking particularly at coastal communities. More than 15 million Filipinos live in what we call low elevation coastal zones. These are coastal areas which are less than 10 meters above sea level. We anticipate that 15 million is in fact an underestimation. We also look at urbanization trends and the metropolitanization of our cities, and how most of these metropolitan areas are in fact coastal. So poverty and in fact the sources of income, as well as gender and children and our elderly, are particularly influenced as far as characterizing vulnerability. In terms of the hazards that Senator Lauren has just described, extreme weather events, particularly tropical cyclones and typhoons, we look particularly at central Philippines and northern Mindanao. And this is a trend that the Manila Observatory, as well as our colleagues in Pagasa and UP, have been looking at in terms of the change in the trajectory of tropical cyclones, in that they seem to be actually crossing the central Philippines more often than in our past. So all those populations, all those economies, whether agricultural or in the service industry or in the manufacturing sector, are going to be vulnerable to this type of change in extreme weather events.
Lauren, what should government, Tony talked about central Philippines, northern Mindanao, different populations and economies that are affected by it.
Actually, when you speak about, Maria, vulnerability, it depends on what are the natural hazards present. Is it an area where there is an active volcano, like Legazpi in Albay? Is it an area where there is a lot of urban population, so there's just too many people? Or is it an area which is a coastal area where that is very prone to storm surges and to possible tsunamis? For example, Dagupan, Cabanatuan, Malabon, because of soil subsidence or ground subsidence, even without climate change, it's already going down because of over-extraction and utilization of water because it's a heavily populated urban area. So vulnerabilities depend on what are the natural hazards present there. Is there a volcano? Is there a mountain that's being quarried? Is there a mountain that is bald and therefore when there is strong, intense rainfall, the soil is soft and therefore there will be a landslide? barangay in Ginsaukon, Southern Leyte, St.
Yeah.
Bernard happened, it was not perhaps mapped as vulnerable, but because of intense rains at the time and the people were not informed and the early warning systems did not reach the barangay, they were swallowed up literally by the mountain. And so vulnerabilities actually change depending on where you are located. So we cannot just say only these areas are vulnerable or hazard-prone areas. I would dare say that the whole Philippines, because we are an archipelago, whether even if you're at the center of Metro Manila, but you have, of course, the West Valley Fault that runs from the Sierra Madre up to Batangas, and that vulnerability is borne out by the West Valley Fault, and because we even built on areas where there is a fault line. So the hazards can be an earthquake belt, can be volcanoes, can be a coastal area where you live, or bald mountains, or because of the over-extraction of water, among many other exploitative, extractive things that human beings do. And I might just say, because it's relevant to Women's Day, no less than the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, said that, and this is based on science, women run the risk of dying from disasters 14 times more than men. So why is it?
Why?
We're really more vulnerable because of our frame, our physical frame, because of our nutritional needs, because perhaps we're caregivers, we go back and get a hold of our children or want to get as much from our homes. But that's an IUCN study that 14 times we are more at risk than men dying from disasters.
Maria, this is correct. Vulnerability depends not only on the characteristics of the land, but also on the people. There are two variables that are important. Their capability to respond to any potential disaster, plus their willingness. So these are two important variables. There are many young children or old people that are more vulnerable. Women are more vulnerable. And so we have to consider these characteristics of people, and more than the capability, also the willingness.
Yes.
Many people die, for example,
dealing with it. In your frank assessment, ladies,
I'll be
please.
very honest with you. Well, we have both laws, the Climate Change Act, which we authored way back in 2009, which created a Commission on Climate Change. It's just been 2 years. And the National Action Plan on Climate Change was just recently approved by the President. It has to go down to the local level. The National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act, again, 2 years ago, we still have to see the local councils respond. But we should also have a paradigm shift from mere responding and reconstructing and rehabilitating and being a culture of giving away bigas and sardinas and chinelas. We should, in fact, prepare. In fact, Sendong, with 1,200 lives lost, I think could have been 200 lives lost, maybe not total zero mortality if we were prepared, if early warning systems were in place, if people actually followed LGUs and moved them away. Like the sandbar in Cagayan de Oro, which was a no-man's zone. They should not have been living there, but they were living there, and they were allowed to live there. And so the people perished because they were fishermen who were living in the sandbar. So if we actually evacuate people early enough and provide them evacuation centers with latrines, potable water, then good food, hot food for the elders, then they would be attracted to move out at the earliest possible time.
Cora.
You know, a big part of our disaster preparedness budget of the government, of the national government, I think is still spent on rehabilitation after the fact. We really should focus more on before the fact, and we have to do it a little more scientifically. Actually, in preparing for this, for risk, any risk, we have to start with communication to bring parties together to a common ground so that assessment of the risk will be done properly, and the result of that will be the management. So what do we do, for example, when we prepare for earthquake,
Yes.
earthquake risk? We do earthquake drills, no? I mean, this is okay if we have already assessed what the situation is.
Which
Did
areas?
the building follow the building code, or if is the building code is still operational? Is it still okay, or do we need to update it? So those are things that fall under the assessment process, which has to be done better, and that's what we hope we'll be able to do when we roll out this the new program that we have, the Information Caravan on Climate Change of Towns, the Towns Foundation, IC3. To,
Towns
open
is the
eyes,
Outstanding
Towns,
Women
the
of
Outstanding
in the
Women
Nation's Service,
The
which the three of us are members of.
Yes. What year were you?
2000.
was in
I don't remember.
92 or
2002.
93.
I think I'm
Were you
always here.
Were you earlier than 90?
Yes, 1987.
87, 93, and 2000. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So-
not according to age.
Yeah, but we have many specialists in our group.
Yes.
We have, I think, the only female oceanographer, Laura David. We have Helen Yap, also in the Marine
Marine
Science
biology.
Institute. We have Alisa Alampay, who is specializing in
Geology,
And so
rocks.
we have, of course, our president, who is a professor at Ateneo, Kathy Vistroyu. So there are many specialists there. And what we hope we'll be able to do is mobilize these people so that we can bring the message, communicate the risks to local communities. Now, you ask, how is the local government responding? Local governments in different areas, some are more prepared than others.
Yes.
But I think one problem that we have seen is that we need to have our database. There's much effort that is spent in collecting information. But when there is a new administration, there is no proper turnover. And so some of this information is under lock and key. Not many people know about them. So one part of this IC3 that we'll have is that to put it all together in Google platform, which is publicly accessible, so that people can participate in the process of assessing risk. Because even the common tao, everybody has his or her idea also
Yes.
of what's happening around, and they can contribute to the process of assessing.
Let me just throw a quick question to Tony before I let her go, because I know that it's very late for you there. Tony, I guess right now I asked of her a frank assessment of the Philippines. Where do we stand in terms of international standards in dealing with climate change?
Well, Senator Lauren mentioned earlier, unfortunately, according to UN University's World Risk Index, the Philippines ranks number 3 in terms of the world's
Number three.
riskiest countries. And this has to do really with institutional capacity to adapt to future impacts of climate change. What this ranking actually is telling us is there needs to be a scaling up of government efforts, both in the national as well as at the local level. And I'd like to say that we do have some shining stars in terms of really preparing for climate change in an institutional way. We really need to involve stakeholders that are local but are also institutional. For example, state colleges and universities. We really need to involve the private universities to provide local technical and scientific resources, knowledge, technologies in terms of strengthening local capacity as far as meeting the challenges of climate change. If we're able to match these efforts with the local government's capacity building, I think at the very local level, and that will of course translate to national capacity, we will be able to at least prepare to face the impacts of climate change in our future. So
Fantastic.
thank you, Maria, for actually letting me go, but for also interviewing me this
Oh.
afternoon in your time.
Thank you so much, Tony. I know that you've been talking about this for a long time. Let's hope people are listening and that they actually start to move forward. Lauren,
think-
since you are in government, government, according to Tony, number 3 in among the world's riskiest countries, and that the government needs to be more agile in it. You've been pushing it.
We have the laws in place, Maria.
But laws are different from
But
reality,
laws are
right?
different from implementation.
Yeah.
That's where the challenge lies.
Right.
In fact, in the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act, we allow the local government units to use their calamity fund not only for reconstruction and response, but even for disaster preparedness activities. Okay. And that's allowed now. So
right.
That's a big step forward. And second, what we must do is really make sure that the local NDREAMC councils understand what they need to do. It's very simple. First, we must implement effectively already existing environmental laws. What am I referring to? RA 9003, the Solid Waste Management Law, which I authored in January in 2001 in my first term. Ondoy and Pepeng would not have happened, at least the monstrosity that happened in Metro Manila and the floods, if we actually segregated garbage at source, recycled, and compost. Because when the rains come, and they're actually heavier, more intense, and more frequent because of climate change, that we cannot do anything about. Yes. But if the waterways and the canals and the esteros were not filled with solid waste from not implementing RA 9003, then water would have flowed more freely, then perhaps it would not have overflowed so much faster, and then those living in esteros and canals would not have died or lost their lives. That's a very graphic and simple example of the non-implementation of a law that is there, that's not being followed, and people eventually die. Second, we must make sure that we have early warning systems. Yep. People will ask, why are you so technical? What do you mean? Okay, look at Bangladesh. Hurricanes happen in Bangladesh. When there was a hurricane in 1991, I can't remember the name of the hurricane, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people died because they were not aware. But they learned their lesson from the 100,000 people who died. They instituted simple mechanisms for early warnings, red flags, bells. And so when cyclone, was it Sidir, happened in the year 2000 plus, less people died, not 100,000, maybe 3,000, 4,000, still people died, but much less because there was early warning system. So a whistle perhaps will do, and we should organize down to the Purok level. Vice Mayor Arquiliano in Camotes Island in the Visayas in Cebu has proven that a vice mayor can actually organize and have people understand it up to the Purok level.
But if you were to take the number of government officials that we have, how many understand and how many are capable of doing
That's a challenge that we must do, because not everyone understands it or prioritizes it. But I'm very happy to note and to tell you that we've been receiving so much response and asking us for a disaster manual. I wish you would give me now a disaster manual and a climate change book, because we distribute disaster preparedness manuals to all schools and LGUs. And that's also the reason why we have DRR, Disaster Risk Reduction, and CCA, Climate Change Adaptation workshops in the regional level, which I want all LGUs to replicate in the provincial, city, municipal, even barangay level. So everybody knows the ABCs of DRR and CCA.
And Cora, well, the towns that you're talking about, right? Towns is going to talk about it, give information about it, but in the end, you're targeting government and people.
Yes, because you see, this is a shared responsibility. Okay. One thing that I'd like to ask the government is also to look at the land use, no? Because I think that's very important. There's a pending bill on land use, and we have to act on that. But it is again, it's a shared responsibility. Everybody should do something, no? For the common tao, your audience here. The people who plug in this website, I can mention 4 areas where you can participate in. Well, first, the overall strategy is what I call SIMBI, start in my backyard. Okay?
I like that.
SIMBI.
I like that.
There's one in the environment field, NIMBY, not in my backyard, no landfill in my backyard. But what I'd like to promote is SIMBI, start in my backyard. So 4 areas. One is energy consumption. Because I think even for companies, that is a very important area of potential changes, improvements, and contribution to mitigating the effect of climate change. Two is water conservation. They say that might be the subject of the next World War, just in case, no? There will be any. The third is solid waste management. And four is the way we decide, our purchasing decisions, no? All of this, we have to look at how we are attending to these subjects and do our share, because everybody should help here. It's a shared responsibility.
Lauren, how difficult is it to convince government this is a priority?
It was very difficult, I must admit, in my first term. But in my second term, no less than Senate President has authored the bill, the People's Survival Fund, which I sponsored on the floor, which we passed on third reading. I remember, just a very short anecdote, in 2007, Manong Johnny asked me, Iha, ano ba yung pinagkasabi mo? Every quarter, I would stand on the floor and talk about climate change and the environment. And that's when most of my colleagues would go out for merienda or to smoke. But now they listen and they ask. And 2 years later, the Senate President himself filed the bill on the People's Survival Fund, which will create a 1 billion peso fund for local governments for people to access for their climate adaptation projects.
But then that still needs to go out.
We still need to pass it in the lower house. They
Right.
have not passed it. This is akin to the Green Climate Fund based on the talks in Copenhagen and
It's
also
7
akin
o'clock.
to the UNFCCC Climate Adaptation Fund, but this is a Philippine fund funded from our General Appropriations Act.
So Cora talked about SIMBI. For ordinary people, and this is part of what we're getting now on social media, you know, what should they be doing?
Very
aside from
simple.
what Lauren-
Ihiwalay ang basura sa nabubulok at hindi nabubulok. That is the essence of RA 9003, the Solid Waste Management Law. Those that you can recycle, the tin cans, the plastic, sell it and you'll have income. And food waste and biodegradable waste, you can actually use it as compost, fertilizer for plants. If you don't even have a garden, you can use the plastics as the containers for malunggay trees, which are edible, which you can eat after it grows. Alokbati, malunggay, you can plant your own trees, plants, vegetables, solid waste you can use as compost and fertilizer. I do that. Cora mentioned about energy conservation. I don't even use air conditioner, believe it or not. I have 2 electric fans. I use air conditioner maybe 15 minutes and I close it, and then I use 2 electric fans facing the wall. For water, whatever remains, I use to water the plants or to wash dishes. So we conserve water.
This is from It's Me Nizel on Twitter. Do we have existing policies that empower women at the local level on climate change issues?
In terms of
You're the
policies,
lawyer.
as
You're
I
the
said,
lawmaker.
the laws are in place. There's a national disaster.
Is it being implemented? Are there? If I'm a woman in Iligan City
And you want to do
and I want to
something.
do something,
Oh,
you know, are there policies that help empower me?
Well, I would like to think that our laws have to be implemented up to the local level. So
Yes.
the question is, are there policies that you can implement? Yes. Now, if you don't know how to do it, call my office. But as Coren, I would say, how do you operationalize day-to-day things? Plant trees, segregate garbage, recycle waste, conserve on energy, turn off the lights. I mean, it can be as simple as living more simply and walking your talk. Okay, I will plug this. Maybe you can ask one copy, you could replicate it in your
Yes.
barangays. It's a compilation of FIVOX, PAG-ASA, DOST, DepEd. It took us 6 months in the making. It's very simple. What to do and how to prepare in earthquakes, in tsunamis, storm surge, floods, etc. Very simple. It's in English. A Filipino one is on the way, and we will have it in 11 languages of the Philippines, which will be done by government as well. We're distributing this for free. So if someone is selling it to you, do not buy. And
It's
tell
the
us it's for
Disaster
free.
Preparedness and First Aid Handbook.
In fact, I think it's uploaded in our website, or is that a separate? Maybe Rappler can help. It is uploaded. Okay, it's
a
uploaded.
question from Ben Garcia, also on Twitter. Luntiang Pilipinas, I followed your Luntiang Pilipinas. How come there are no updates? Do you have a website?
Oh yes, there's a website, and we planted more than 2 million trees in my first term. What we do now is we don't do the tree planting itself. We distribute seedlings for others to plant. And what we do is we have MOUs with organizations who will do the tree planting, and we link them to the DNR, where I put my funds for my PDAF for free seedlings. Again, do not buy the seedlings. They're supposed to give it to you for free, because I realize I'm a lawmaker. I don't do the reforestation myself or the planting myself, but I give away free seedlings to everyone who has the capacity and the space to plant.
Cora, Nikki Luna tweeted about indigenous people
yes.
and women being the most vulnerable. What can be done to address that particular vulnerable sector?
Well, we have to include them in the process of communication. We have, Towns has a project we call Kalinga IP program. We have started helping the Gawad Kalinga build a community. We call it Kalinga para sa Aita. And so we have to include them, because they're the ones who are some of the most vulnerable in the areas that they live in. But you know, I just want to go back to this question on the policy.
Yes.
Perhaps we should not wait for any policy pronouncement, because this is something that affects all of us. Now, to those who are in business, we should look at it as green environment is good business. No, good environment is good business. And there is another acronym that I always say, TLC for the environment. We need top management commitment by leading by example in caring for the environment. No? So we have to remember to do these things. We do not wait, do not depend on the government, because the government resources are already stretched.
This one is from Monk Taoist. Monk Taoist. Environmental management is 40 years with Silent Spring as a marker. Why hasn't it made any headway, and why are we still talking about it now?
Well, we will always be talking about it, I guess, for as long as we are alive, because there are many changes. This is not a static environment that we are in. We are living, with living things. So we are all living human beings. So there will always be change. And so therefore, it will be a continuing issue. And the challenge to nurture, to protect our environment, to conserve our resources, this will always be with us. And each one must do a share here. Now, on tree planting, what we're trying to do here in MAP is make it greening with sustainable business, no? Because sometimes it's difficult to make people appreciate trees that will take a long time to grow, and they do not see the advantage to them during their lifetime. We have focused on bamboo. By the way, I'm wearing a shawl here made of bamboo, no? Bamboo fiber. Bamboo, because you do not have to kill bamboo, a bamboo clump, no, to be able to harvest poles from it. And we are targeting 3 major products: food from the shoots, and even leaves can be fed to chicken, then construction materials, and biocoal, which is bioenergy. We want to prove that we can do environmental conservation, prevent soil erosion, protect our slopes, and still be able to generate products that can provide livelihood, especially to the poor. So,
earlier, Maria, somebody tweeted about indigenous peoples.
Yes.
And I'm glad they did, because there's a direct correlation between the preservation of our heritage and our culture of indigenous peoples. 110 ethno-linguistic groups, or IP groups, or cultural communities, that's all synonyms of the Philippines. I chair the Committee on Cultural Communities, and we've actually merged our efforts as chair of climate change and cultural communities, because our indigenous peoples' culture is threatened when their habitat is threatened.
Correct.
When there is mining, excessive extractive mining that is unsustainable, when there is illegal logging and deforestation in areas which they inhabit, then their lives and livelihoods and their culture is also threatened. We have a program with the SUC, State Universities and Colleges of the Cordillera, the 6 of them, with all the presidents, where they are documenting the indigenous knowledge, environmental and agricultural practices of our IP groups in the Cordillera so that we do not lose them. In fact, tomorrow I am going to the Banawe rice terraces to consult with the local stakeholders, not just the LGUs, but also the people's organizations, to see what we can do to help save the rice terraces, which is deteriorating as well. So women, indigenous peoples, and environment, their interests, our interests, are closely interrelated. If we lose the environment, we lose identity as women, and we lose the culture of our indigenous peoples.
It seems though, for everything that you're talking about, the initiatives that are there, it requires a lot of people to do it at the same time, correct?
Everybody.
A lot of people to make any kind
Everybody
of
has his role.
Actually,
requires
everybody,
everyone
yes.
to do it.
Yes.
And I guess, what if they don't? I mean, so far, I don't...
If they don't, we will. So we cannot be defeatist, and we cannot say,
Yeah.
nobody cares. In fact, we cannot say, nobody listen. I think Cora and I, and all of us started not just talking about this, but doing our share when nobody cared to listen.
Correct.
I was a journalist 30 years ago when I started doing documentaries on the Tulyahan River, on the Pasig River, 30 years ago in 1986.
I
So at
remember
the
this.
time,
Yes.
people will say, that's why her show is not rating, because she's
Yeah.
doing environment. Kalawit Island, Kalawit what?
Yes.
In Palawan in 1986. And so I didn't care, because it's important that mamulat ang tao, may kamulatan, there's awareness. And so eventually it was used by the station I was working in 10 years later as basis for their projects. And so if they don't do it, we will. If we're the only one talking in Rappler, we will. If they're not, we're going to tweet about it. We're going to talk about it. I'm going to make sure my laws are implemented. My staff of 30 in the Senate did not know much, did not know anything about the environment. My head of legislation is a magna cum laude of economics, and I convinced her, you put your good sense in economics from my state university into climate change and environment. And she's so now engaged in climate change. So I will never give up, even if I'm the last person breathing on this earth, because it is so essential.
Well,
Yeah.
well, we're gonna take a very short break, and then we'll come back to close and say goodbye. Please take the time to tweet your questions now. Last questions when we come back.